Low canyon wind, distant rain on hard ground. Mara Vale did not walk into Cinder Crossing. Pause. She was dragged there by the last thing she owned, a cracked wedding ring tied to a strip of black cloth, hung from her fist as she stumbled out of the canyon pass with mud on her skirt, blood on her mouth, and no shadow behind her but grief. Pause. The flood had taken her husband 3 weeks earlier. It had taken the cabin he built with his own hands, the mule team they still owed money on, the 2 milk cows, the wheat they had prayed would get them through winter, and the shallow grave Mara had tried to dig before the earth turned to water under her palms. By the time she reached the town, she was 27 years old and looked like a woman who had already been buried once. Cinder Crossing was not a place that softened for sorrow. It was a cattle stop pressed between red cliffs and dry riverbeds, where men measured kindness by how little it cost them, and women learned to keep their doors latched before sunset. The town had a church with cracked windows, a saloon with new glass, and a jail that stayed empty unless a poor man got drunk enough to be useful as an example. Mara made it to the pump outside the mercantile before her knees failed. SFX body collapsing into mud, distant Wagon Creek. When she woke, she was lying on a flour sack in the storeroom, listening to rain tick through a leak in the roof. A woman with iron-gray hair stood over her with a lantern. "You got kin here?" Mara tried to answer, her throat only scraped. The woman waited. The woman sighed like Mara had inconvenienced the weather. "Then you can't stay here." Pause. "I can work," Mara whispered. "You can barely breathe. I can still work." For a moment, the woman looked at the bruises under Mara's collar, the split knuckles, the wedding ring tied in black cloth. Pity flickered across her face, and died before it became help. "There's a washhouse behind Mrs. Baines's boarding rooms. She's short a girl. Tell her Lottie sent you. Don't expect charity." Mara stood by leaning against crates. The woman did not touch her. No one in Cinder Crossing touched pain unless they were the ones causing it. Mrs. Baines gave Mara a cot under the stairs, meals, and $1.75 a week to boil sheets, scrub floors, empty slop buckets, and keep her mouth shut. The cot was narrow. The ceiling dripped. It was still better than the road. For the first few days, people only stared. Then the calves started dying on the East Ranch. A chimney collapsed in a dry wind. A boy broke his arm falling from a hay wagon. Slowly, by the end of Mara's second week, Cinder Crossing had decided what she was. Not a widow, not a worker, a bad omen. People said she had walked out of the flood because death refused to keep her. They said the black cloth around her ring proved she had buried a curse instead of a husband. They said no woman survived that much unless she had traded something for it. Mara heard the whispers while she carried laundry through the street. She heard them at the pump. She heard them from children who had learned cruelty by copying the adults who pretended to be ashamed of it. The first man to touch her was Wade Crowder, a ranch hand with rotten teeth and a habit of mistaking fear for permission. He cornered her beside the dry goods shed, with 2 friends behind him and a bottle swinging from his fingers. "Well, look here," he said. The flood witch learned to stand upright. Mara kept her eyes down. "I'm only taking sheets to Mrs. Baines. Everything you touch goes bad." He stepped closer. "Maybe we ought to see if bad luck bleeds." SFX laundry basket knocked into mud, He knocked the basket from her arms. Fresh sheets fell into the mud. Mara bent to gather them, and Wade put his boot between her shoulders. Not hard enough to break anything, hard enough to teach the street what was allowed. She hit the ground with her cheek in the muck, and the cracked ring pressed under her palm. Paused people watched from doorways. No one moved. That was the first lesson Cinder Crossing gave her. A crowd is not a witness, if it has already chosen the story. After that, it became easier for everyone. Someone smeared ash on her cot. Someone threw dead mice into the washwater. Mrs. Baines docked her pay for ruined linens. Mara had not ruined. Children spat the word witch when she passed. Mara learned to make herself smaller, but smallness did not save her. It only gave people less guilt when they stepped over her. The breaking point came during the autumn cattle sale. Cinder Crossing was swollen with buyers, drovers, wagons, dust, shouting, and money. Mara had been sent across town with folded bedding for 2 men staying at the boarding rooms. She held the stack high against her chest, trying not to look at anyone. Wade Crowder saw her from the saloon steps. "There she is," he called. "The widow curse herself." Heads turned. Mara kept walking. Wade stepped into her path and smiled wide. "Going to hex the sale now? Prices already look thin. Let me pass." Listen to her, like she belongs on the road with decent folk. He grabbed the bedding and flung it into the dirt. Mara crouched to pick it up. Wade kicked her hands away. Pause. Something inside her went still. Not brave, not safe. Still, for weeks she had bent and bent and bent, because bending was what grief had taught her. Bending kept you alive when the world had more weight than mercy. But there is a point where bending becomes breaking. Mara looked up at him through the hair in her face. Wade's grin shifted. "What?" he said. "You got a curse for me?" Before Mara could answer, a quiet voice cut through the street. "Move away from her." He came through the dust in a black coat faded brown at the shoulders, hat low, gloved hands loose at his sides. He was tall, not young, with a scar running beside one eye, and the kind of calm men only pretend to have until they have earned it. Wade straightened. "This don't concern you, Slate. It happened in the street I paid to grade for my cattle sale," the man said. "That makes it concern me." Abram Slate. Mara knew the name because everyone knew it. Owner of Thornbreak Ranch, 3 hours west through bad country. Rich, dangerous, widowed. A man people hated quietly and obeyed out loud. Wade tried to laugh. "She's trouble. Whole town knows it." Abram looked at Mara on the ground, then at Wade. "She is half starved and half your size. You pushed her down in front of 100 people. If that is what passes for courage here, this town is poorer than I thought." The silence turned sharp. Wade's hand twitched near his belt. Wade lowered it. "Apologize," Abram said. "To her, to the lady. She ain't. Now." Sharp pause. That one word hit harder than shouting. Wade swallowed. "Sorry." "Say it like you understand English." "I'm sorry." Abram let the silence hold him there until Wade's face burned red. Then he nodded toward the saloon. "Get gone." Wade went. His friends followed. The crowd dissolved because people will watch cruelty for entertainment, but they avoid justice when it starts asking questions. Abram offered Mara his hand. She stared at it. Help always had a hook. Men always wanted something, even when they wore manners like a clean shirt. But her ribs hurt, her hands were bleeding, and the road was still under her. She took his hand. He lifted her easily, then released her at once and stepped back. "Are you hurt?" "I have been worse." His jaw tightened. "That was not what I asked." Mara said nothing. Abram picked up the bedding, shook off what dust he could, and handed it to her. Then he removed his hat. "Ma'am, I am sorry my town taught you it was allowed to treat you that way. It isn't your town, more than it should be." He studied her face, not hungrily, not kindly, exactly carefully. "What is your name?" "Mara Vale." "Mrs. Vale, do you have anyone here?" "No, a room, a cot, safety." She almost laughed. He looked toward the street, then back at her. "Pause. I need a wife." Mara stepped away so fast the bedding nearly slipped. Abram did not move. "Not in the way you are thinking," he said. "I need a legal wife at Thornbreak, someone who can run a house, keep accounts, manage supplies, and stand living far from town. A housekeeper quits. A wife cannot be run off as easily. A wife is under my protection, and people here understand what that means. You don't know me. I know you survived 6 weeks in this place while it fed on you. That is not a reason to marry someone." "No," Abram said. "It is a reason to believe you are hard to kill." That should have frightened her. But fear had started to feel ordinary. He told her the terms plainly: a room with a lock, no touch she did not permit, work in exchange for safety, shelter, and wages set aside in her name. If she chose to leave, he would give her a horse, supplies, and enough money to begin again somewhere else. No poetry, no promises of affection, only a bargain with sharp edges and no hidden sweetness. "Why me?" she asked. Abram's eyes moved over the street that had watched her fall. "Because you need a door out," he said, "and I need someone who will not mistake a hard life for a broken one." That night, Mara sat under Mrs. Baines's stairs with the cracked wedding ring in her palm. Her dead husband's ring, the last proof she had once belonged to a kinder story. Saying yes to Abram Slate was foolish, maybe deadly. Men with reputations did not earn them by being gentle, and isolated ranches could hide more suffering than towns ever bothered to notice. But staying meant the slow death Cinder Crossing had already begun. By dawn, Mara had made her choice. A traveling preacher married them beside the hotel stove for $4. 2 signatures, and no questions. Mara wore the cleanest dress she owned, which was still stained at the hem. The cracked wedding ring stayed tied to the black cloth and hidden in her pocket. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, nothing in the room changed. No music, no blessing. Only a door opening where there had been none. They left Cinder Crossing in a wagon loaded with flour, tools, coffee, nails, and Mara's entire life wrapped in one pillowcase. No one waved, no one called after her. By noon, the town had already found new misfortune to blame on someone else. SFX wagon wheels over stone, wind opening into wide canyon. Thornbreak Ranch sat in a green basin under a wall of red stone. The house was bigger than Mara expected, but plain, with a deep porch, weathered boards, and windows that caught the last light like tired eyes. 3 men waited by the corral. Abram introduced them without ceremony. Tom S. Vega, foreman. Little Jem, who was not little except in age, and Old Rusk, who looked older than the mountain and less forgiving. "This is my wife," Abram said. "Mrs. Slate will run the house. If she gives an instruction about stores, meals, linens, or household work, you treat it as mine." Tom S. touched the brim of his hat. "Welcome, Ciora." Jem stared until Rusk slapped the back of his head. Mara stood there in the yard, married to a stranger, watched by men who did not know whether she was trouble or rescue, and felt the truth settle around her. She had escaped a cage. She had not yet found freedom. The first month at Thornbreak was labor without softness. The house was not filthy, but it was tired in the way lonely houses get tired. Dust lay under every chair. Grease had become part of the stove. Curtains hung stiff with smoke. She counted flour, beans, salt pork, lamp oil, coffee, nails, cartridges, and thread. Abram watched without interfering. When he said, "You do not have to fix 5 years of neglect in 5 days," Mara kept scrubbing. "I need the work." He understood enough to leave her with it. Small things changed first. She made cornbread on the 4th morning. Rusk took 2 pieces and pretended he had not. Jem asked if there was more, then looked terrified that he had spoken. Tom S. closed his eyes after the first bite and said his mother had made bread like that when he was a boy. After that, the men came to breakfast. They began speaking around her instead of over her. They brought torn shirts to be mended and asked before entering the kitchen. Mara learned the names of horses, the weak gate on the south pasture, the place in the roof that leaked during hard rain, and the way Abram went quiet every evening. When the sun dropped behind the canyon wall, he was not cruel. That unsettled her more than cruelty would have. Cruelty was simple. She knew where to stand around it. Abram was careful. He knocked before passing her door. He left firewood near the kitchen without mentioning it. He never asked about her husband until the night she found him sitting on the back steps with a lantern unlit beside him. "Bad dream?" she asked. He did not look at her. "Old one, your wife?" His face tightened at the word. "Evelyn. She died in childbirth 6 years ago, the baby with her." Pause. For the first time since the flood, Mara felt her grief stand beside someone else's, and not have to explain itself. After that, partnership arrived quietly, coffee ready before dawn, wood stacked before storms, a ledger corrected, a rifle placed where Mara could reach it. Then a warning appeared at the north gate, SFX, metal creaking in wind, not a dead animal. Not a note. A broken horseshoe nailed upside down to the post, blackened in fire, with 4 words burned into the wood beneath it. "Pay what you stole." Abram stared at it for a long time. Mara knew enough not to ask if he was afraid. "Who?" she said. "Jonah Pike." The name meant nothing to her. "It will," Abram said. Years before Thornbreak, before cattle and ledgers and respectability, Abram had ridden with a gang out of the mining camps, robberies, payroll wagons, violence he did not dress up when he confessed it. Pike had led them. Abram had walked away after a job went wrong and men died. Pike went to prison and came out believing Abram owed him everything he had built since. "The ranch," Mara said. "The ranch, my life. Anyone close enough to hurt me, then teach me to shoot better." Abram looked at her. "I will not make you part of my past." Every afternoon behind the barn, Mara learned to brace the rifle, breathe through the trigger, reload without looking down, and accept the kick before it came. At first she missed bottles by yards, then by inches. Then glass began to break. SFX rifle shot. Bottle shatter the first time she hit 3 in a row. Abram only said, "Again." But his eyes said more. Pike came a week later with 5 riders and a smile like a cut. He stopped outside the yard and called Abram by a name. "So that is what you bought yourself," he called. "A new widow waiting to happen." Mara put the front sight on his chest, Abram said without looking back. "Not unless she chooses." Pike laughed and rode away. He returned at night. The barn caught first. SFX. Sudden barn fire. Horses screaming. Men shouting. Fire leapt through the dry hay so fast. The whole valley seemed to wake burning. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Shadows moved between flame and smoke. Mara ran outside with the rifle in both hands. A man came out of the smoke raising a pistol. She fired before fear could speak. He dropped. The world did not stop. That shocked her more than the killing. She had expected some bell to ring inside her. Some proof that a life had just crossed through her hands. Instead there was only the barn, the smoke. The next threat, the need to stay alive. Pike tried to shoot Abram from behind. Mara fired and missed. Abram tackled him into the dirt. Rusk struck another man with the butt of a shotgun. Tom S. dragged horses loose while Jem sobbed and worked anyway. By dawn, 3 of Pike's men were dead. 2 had fled, and Pike was tied to the corral rail with his face in the dust, waiting for a sheriff who would take 4 days to arrive. Mara stood over the body of the man she had shot and waited for guilt. What came first was trembling. Abram found her there. "You saved lives." "I killed him." "Yes, I thought it would feel different." "It will feel different every time you remember it," he said. "But listen to me. You did not go hunting for blood. Blood came to the door. Pause. That became the rule. Thornbreak lived by. Winter came early. Snow sealed the pass, buried fences, froze water troughs, and turned every chore into a fight. During one storm, Abram collapsed with fever and cold after pushing himself too far. Mara stripped his wet clothes, piled blankets over him, forced broth past his teeth, and sat awake for 30 hours listening to his breath. Near dawn, half out of his mind, he whispered, "Evelyn." Mara touched his forehead. "No, Mara." His eyes focused slowly. "You should leave before this place kills you too." "I have already been killed once," she said. "I did not care for it." He almost smiled. The fever broke by morning. What did not break was the thing forming between them. It had no pretty name yet. It did not need one. It lived in practical things. In Abram letting Mara run the stores without checking her work. In Mara knowing when his silence meant grief and when it meant danger. In the space between 2 people who had stopped pretending they were only surviving separately. Then the wolf came down from the high timber. At first, it took weak cattle, then healthy ones. It killed more than it ate, leaving bodies torn and steaming in the snow. Tracks circled the house. A yellow-eyed shape watched from the tree line and vanished whenever a rifle lifted. It was old, scarred, and wrong. Not supernatural. Worse. Smart enough to learn. One morning it attacked a hired hand near the new barn frame. The man screamed. Mara fired first, hitting its shoulder. Abram fired next. The animal still came, low and fast. Not at the injured man anymore. At Abram. Mara moved without deciding. She stepped between them and raised the rifle like a bar. SFX, Animal Impact, Snow Crush. Rifle clatter, the wolf hit her chest and drove her into the snow. Its jaws closed on her forearm. Pain burned white. She heard Abram shout her name in a voice she had never heard from him before. A voice stripped of control. Then he was there with a knife, driving it down until the wolf released her and collapsed. Mara woke 3 days later with her arm wrapped, fever fading, and Abram asleep in a chair beside her bed, holding her uninjured hand like it was the last rope in a flood. "You stayed," she whispered. He jerked awake. "You nearly died." "So did you. I have nearly died before. Not where I could see it." That was the closest they came to a confession until Abram lowered his head and kissed her forehead with the care of a man touching a wound. "You matter," he said, "more than I meant to allow." Mara closed her eyes. "So do you." Spring did not bring peace. It brought a girl. She came on a swayback mare at dusk, 17 at most, with one eye swollen shut and one hand pressed to her ribs. She fell from the saddle before anyone could ask her name. Mara reached her first. The girl smelled of rain, sweat, and terror. "Please," she whispered, "don't send me back." Her name was Nell Carver. Her father and brother had beaten her for refusing a marriage to a man older than Abram. Someone in Cinder Crossing had told her about the woman at Thornbreak, who had once crawled into town with nothing and lived. Mara put Nell in her own bed, cleaned her wounds, and fed her broth. When Abram found Mara in the kitchen later, washing blood from her sleeves, he did not ask whether the girl would stay. He only said, "If they come for her?" Mara wrung out the cloth until red water ran between her fingers. "Then they find out what kind of house this is." Nell's father came 10 days later with 2 sons, and a preacher who had suddenly discovered an interest in family order. Mara met them on the porch. Abram stood behind her, not because she needed permission, but because power sometimes has to be visible before fools respect words. "I came for my daughter," Silas Carver said. "She is not cattle," Mara replied. "She is mine. She is under my roof." Carver stepped forward. Abram's rifle lifted an inch. The man stopped. Mara looked past him at the brothers, both young, both mean in the same borrowed way. "Tell me something," she said. "How many blows does a father get before God stops calling it discipline?" The preacher went pale. Carver cursed. From the upstairs window came the click of a rifle cocking. SFX. Rifle hammer click. Nell stood there with one bruised eye open, hands shaking, barrel steady. "I'm not going back," she said. Her father looked up at the gun, then at Mara, then at Abram Slate. For the first time in his life, he saw that fear could face both ways. He left swearing. Nell cried after he was gone, not because she wanted him back, but because freedom can hurt when it first returns to the body. Mara taught her to shoot the next morning. More came. A widow whose husband's brothers had tried to seize her land and her bed in the same week. A woman with 2 children and a burn marked down her neck. A boy who had been beaten for defending his sister. A pregnant girl who would not name the man and did not have to. Thornbreak became crowded, then louder, then alive in a way it had not been when it was only a ranch. They built 2 cabins, then a bunk room, then a second pantry. Meals stretched long across tables made from old doors. Work was divided. Skills appeared where suffering had hidden them. Nell had a gift with horses. The widow, Ruth Ansell, could preserve vegetables better than anyone west of the railhead. Little Jem stopped being little and became the person every frightened child followed. Mara understood before anyone said it. They were no longer only sheltering people. They were making a different kind of law, not written in courthouse books, written in who was allowed to sleep without fear. That kind of law makes enemies. Merchants shorted their orders. Letters arrived open. Men in town called Thornbreak a den of ruined women, then looked away when their own wives listened too closely. At the next cattle sale, Silas Carver confronted them with 6 ranchers behind him. "You are stealing from families," he said, "taking wives, daughters, labor, teaching women to disobey. This ends now." Mara stepped forward before Abram could. "No," she said. "What ends now is pretending cruelty becomes respectable when it happens behind a family door." People turned. Carver's face darkened. "This is not your place. Then why are you afraid of me speaking in it?" The question traveled farther than shouting would have. A rancher named Abel Trent removed his hat. He was old, thick-handed, and shaking. "My daughter ran once," he said to the men around him. "I sent her back because men told me that was proper. 2 months later she was dead, fell downstairs, they said." His voice broke. "She did not fall." The auction yard went silent. Mara saw women crying without making a sound. She saw men refusing to meet their eyes. She saw Carver understand that the ground under him had shifted. He pointed at Mara. "You will regret making yourself a symbol." Mara thought of the street in Cinder Crossing. Wade Crowder's boot, the crowd that had watched. "I was made into worse things by better cowards than you," she said. "A symbol is an improvement." The attack came in January. No moon, hard cold, men on horseback. They broke windows, threw oil, and fired into the house as it caught. SFX, glass breaking, fire catching, horses pounding snow. Mara woke to smoke and children screaming. She ran room to room, dragging people from beds, shouting names, counting bodies. Abram and Thomas returned fire from the yard. Nell got the children to the barn. Ruth carried flour sacks out before the kitchen roof collapsed. Jem took a bullet through the shoulder and kept loading rifles with one arm. The house burned to the foundation. The attackers rode off before dawn, leaving hoofprints, blood, and the knowledge that they would come again. 23 people stood in the snow and watched their home fall inward. No one had died. That was the miracle. Not the fire, not the bullets, not survival as an idea. 23 people breathing in the dark. Mara looked at the ruins and felt something colder than rage. "They will keep coming," she said. Abram knew what she meant before she finished. "No. If I wait here, they choose the next night, the next fire, the next child in the wrong window. You cannot ride alone into that. I can do many things I should not have had to learn." He caught her arm, careful of the old scar. "This is revenge talking." "No," Mara said. "Revenge wants satisfaction. I do not expect any." She rode before sunrise, not toward town, toward the ridge country where Carver and his men kept a winter camp, believing distance and numbers made them safe. Mara followed their trail for 2 days through hard snow and wind that skinned the face raw. By the time she found the camp, her anger had burned down into purpose. There were 9 men. She waited until dark. She cut loose their horses first. Then she fired into the lanterns, shattering light, turning their confidence into smoke and confusion. SFX. Rifle shot. Lantern glass exploding. Men shouting. Men shouted. Some ran for rifles. Some ran for mounts that were no longer there. Mara moved through the rocks, shooting only when a man raised a weapon at her. Carver found her near the canyon wall. Both of them out of bullets. He had a knife. So did she. "You think killing me makes you righteous?" He spat. "No, Mara said. I think leaving you free makes me responsible. He lunged. He was larger, stronger, and sure that size was the same as power. It had been for most of his life. He dropped to one knee, grabbed at her skirt, and she struck him with the butt of the empty revolver until he released her. He fell back against the rock, breathing in wet pools. Which? He whispered. Mara looked down at him. No, she said. A door you should not have tried to close. She left him alive enough for the cold to decide what the law had refused to. Only 4 men from that camp reached town, all wounded, all carrying the same message. Thornbreak was not open for predators. Mara returned half frozen, bleeding from a cut along her shoulder, and so exhausted she fell from the saddle inside the south gate. When she woke, Abram was beside her. For once, he looked frightened enough not to hide it. I thought I had lost you. I told you I was hard to kill. That joke is getting less charming. She tried to smile. It hurt. Did they come back? No. Then it worked. He was quiet for a long time. At what cost? Mara looked toward the window, where smoke still rose from the ruins of the old house. At the cost the world charges people who refuse to stay victims. Her body healed faster than her mind. There were nights when she woke with Carver's last word in her ear. Nights when she looked at her hands and wondered how much violence could pass through a person before it became part of the bones. Abram never told her it was simple. That was why she trusted him. You did terrible things, he said one night on the barn steps. For good reasons. Both can be true. Then what am I? He took her scarred hand. Someone who still asks that question. They rebuilt in spring. Not the old house, a bigger one. Long rooms, wide kitchen, more beds, a school corner, a locked cabinet for weapons and another for medicine, a porch deep enough for 20 people to sit out of rain. Above the main gate, Russ carved a sign. Thornbreak Refuge. Mara hated it at first. It sounds grand. It is grand, Nell said. So the sign stayed. Years changed the ranch more than any fire. Children grew up there who did not flinch when a door slammed. Women arrived silent and left laughing too loud. Men who came broken learned that strength did not mean owning another person's fear. The place became known across 3 territories as the Canyon Refuge, where no one asked what you had survived before deciding you deserved supper. Mara and Abram became husband and wife slowly, then completely. No ceremony marked the change, no single night. It happened in cups of coffee, in shared ledgers, in grief spoken without shame. In the way his hand found hers when bad news came, in the way she leaned against him on the porch, as if her body had finally accepted the idea of rest. I love you, she told him once, years after everyone else already knew. Abram smiled into the dark. I have been trying not to rush you. You, patient, only with things worth waiting for. He died an old man under a quilt Ruth had sewn from scraps of the first burned house. Mara buried him in the orchard beneath a stone marked only with his name and the brand he had built before he understood what it was for. People expected Thornbreak to weaken without Abram Slate's reputation guarding it. Mara disappointed them. She rode to the territorial capital with papers, witnesses, and a lawyer who learned quickly not to interrupt her. When she returned, Thornbreak was no longer the property of one man or one widow. It was a trust. land that could not be sold out from under the people who needed it. A refuge protected not by fear of Abram Slate, but by law, rifles, community, and memory. Mara grew old there, her hair silvered, her hands stiffened. The scar on her arm ached before storms. She walked slower, but no one mistook that for weakness. Young women came to her with shaking voices and left with instructions: how to plant potatoes, how to clean a wound, how to read a contract, how to shoot only when necessary, and never because anger asked sweetly. Nell took over the daily running before Mara admitted she was tired. "I'm afraid I won't be what you were," Nell said. Mara touched the younger woman's cheek. "Good, be what comes next." On Mara's last evening, she sat on the porch watching children chase each other beneath the gate. A gate that had once been a warning, then a boundary, then a promise. Pause, the cracked wedding ring still hung on its black cloth beside her bed. Not as grief anymore, as proof. She had arrived in Cinder Crossing with nothing but bruises, mud, and a ring that said she had belonged to a life the flood could not return. She left behind locked doors for predators, open doors for the hunted, and a valley full of people who knew survival was not the end of a story. It was the place a better one could begin. When Mara Slate died, they buried her beside Abram in the orchard. Nell carved the words herself. Mara Slate, she kept the gate open. Pause, and long after the town that called her cursed had turned to dust, that gate still stood open.